Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored Never Boring. If you caught my videos about it the other week, you will know that Avalon Hill are currently running a crowdfunding campaign on their HasLab platform to bring back the tabletop skirmish game HeroScape. And this got me thinking, which would explain that faint smell of burning. HeroScape is a game I never really got into, but can't really explain why. It's the sort of game I should love, but it just didn't land with me, so it's not a game I have in my collection anymore. However, many moons ago, I did buy my brother-in-law a copy of the HeroScape Marvel themed starter set, and it just so happens that he still had it. And here it is. It's caked with around 12 years of dust from being stuck in the back of a wardrobe, and it's missing a few tiles, but it is otherwise a complete and totally playable copy of HeroScape. So in today's video, we're going to take a little look at HeroScape Marvel: The Conflict Begins. For those of you who don't know, HeroScape first hit retail back in 2004, and it made a few waves. Not so much here in the UK, but certainly in the US, and it was popular enough to generate a fanbase that has remained active ever since. The game had several selling points that helped it to stand out. First of all, it had pre-painted miniatures, and they weren't the most horrible pre-painted figures I've ever seen. Quality varied naturally, but they looked good on the table and really had a strong toy factor. That toy factor was magnified by the second interesting feature. The units you could draw from to create your armies were a crazy mishmash of styles and themes. There were samurais, soldiers, Vikings, aliens, men in black style agents, elves, dragons, dinosaurs and robots. It's like someone saw their kids tipping a toy box on the floor and it inspired them to create a skirmish game. And that someone was actually several someones, namely Stephen Baker, Rob Daviau and Craig Van Ness, who between them working for Hasbro had titles to their names such as HeroQuest, Space Crusade, Star Wars Epic Duels and Transformers Armada Battle for Cybertron. The third selling point for the game was the easily accessible rules. This was a game that offered strategy but also kept things nice and simple. So simple in fact that there were two versions of the game in the box. A basic version which was so simple I've played it with my 5-year-old, and then the more in-depth full game which is still incredibly easy to pick up but offers a more engaging experience. But the biggest selling point, the thing I am sure people remember the most, was the terrain. HeroScape didn't have a board and it didn't play out over a tabletop using a tape measure, it used plastic terrain tiles. These hex-shaped tiles fitted together to create any battlefield you could imagine, as long as you could only imagine slightly blocky hex-based battlefields. And you didn't just build horizontally, you could build vertically too. It was like Lego for wargames, just less painful to stand on. And this terrain did more than give the game a great table presence, it was baked into the rules, with the thickness of the tiles being carefully matched to the heights of the miniatures to provide a standardised way of measuring distance. The Marvel starter set I have here came out in 2007, just before the Swarm of the Marrow starter set, which superseded the original Rise of the Valkyrie starter set. And to the best of my understanding, this particular effort was not as well received as some others. It only has 10 characters and it has far fewer terrain pieces than in the original starter set. Limiting the terrain in a box like this does highlight a weakness of the game system. It's reliant on having a lot of tiles to build with. The number of tiles in your collection defines the extent of your battlefield, both horizontally and vertically, and with just a limited pool to draw from, you are only going to be able to create small arenas with very little in the way of changes in elevation. This issue is compounded by the presence of superheroes with powers that allow them to whiz around the board at great speed. When Hulk can launch himself over 10 hexes in any direction ignoring elevation, it really highlights how small the playing field is with just the components out of the box. So the scope of this starter set may be reduced compared to other HeroScape sets, but it did introduce Marvel superheroes, which is fun. I mean, I'd rather have the D&D starter set they put out later on, but this is fine. I believe there was supposed to be an expansion with more superhero characters, but it never materialised. It also has a ruined building with a breakout wall section, and I'm no HeroScape scholar so I may be wrong here, but I think this might be the first, maybe only time there were concrete and asphalt tiles, unless they just repurposed existing tile colours. When opening the box to start preparing this review, I think one of the first impressions I had was how few components there really are. Besides the terrain and the characters, you really only get a handful of custom dice and a d20, some wound counters and a round counter, 8 order tokens, 2 glyphs representing objectives or items, and the unit cards. The miniatures are actually pretty cool. You get a classic lineup of heroes and villains divided into 2 teams. For the heroes we have Spider-Man, Captain America, Silver Surfer, Iron Man and Hulk. Meanwhile the evil roster seems to be almost a mirror image, as you get Venom, Red Skull, Thanos, Doctor Doom and Abomination. The sculpts aren't particularly dynamic, but the pre-paints aren't too shabby, and Hasbro went the extra mile on the bases by putting stickers on them to give the impression of ground without having to paint them. They definitely look good on the table and are easily comparable to what a relatively new hobbyist could do with their own brush. The game itself is actually pretty versatile, allowing players to approach it in several ways. As I've already mentioned, there is a basic game which doesn't concern itself with unit special abilities and is really just a big old dice fest. Fun for younger gamers, but something I think most people with more than a passing interest in board games can skip over. The full game isn't exactly complicated either, it's mainly the abilities of the characters that provides depth to the strategies. In addition to those two game modes, the starter set includes a number of narrative scenarios, providing map layouts, team builds and special rules to let players create exciting skirmishes. I think the most interesting sees one player controlling an enraged Hulk, while another player controls a group of heroes searching for a sleeping agent to bring him under control. But of course that's only the beginning. The idea is you get invested in the game system, you get more units, more tiles, and then you go crazy. You design your own battlefields, come up with your own scenarios, or just play a fixed point skirmish going toe to toe with an opponent, or several opponents, with teams of equal power. So let's spend a few minutes doing a crash course on how to play. The first thing you want to do is build your battlefield. For some people this is a highlight, for other people it's going to be a bit of a chore. You either choose a scenario and have to recreate the map from there, which isn't a lot of fun to be fair, or you can build your own, which is more fun but can also be pretty time consuming. With that done, you need to pick your armies. There's different ways to go about doing this, but it boils down to a classic points system. You agree on a points total with your opponent, and then you spend your points on characters. Stronger characters cost more points, so you can see Hulk here is 370 points, while poor old Spidey is just 160. And while we have Spidey's card here, we may as well take a closer look at it. On the far left you have some basic traits. Spidey is a human, he is a unique hero, which means you can only have one of him on your team. He is a crime fighter and tricky, which are keywords that may come into effect sometimes. He is medium sized, and that 5 means he is 5 tiles high. Next we have a list of special abilities. Spidey Sense 11 gives him a chance to avoid damage without rolling for defense, he just needs to roll 11 or more on a d20. Swing Line 4 allows him to swing around on his web instead of moving normally, which is very handy for scaling high obstacles. It only allows him to move 4 spaces, but it ignores elevation while doing so. He has a special attack allowing him to zap people up to 4 spaces away with his web, and he also has a super strength icon, which means it's very difficult for him to take damage when falling and very easy for him to punch through walls. In the third column we get basic stats that are pretty self-explanatory. 5 life means he takes 5 wounds before dying, move 6 means his regular move is 6 hexes, range 1 means he can only make normal attacks on adjacent targets, which isn't applicable for his special web attack, attack 4 means he normally rolls 4 dice when attacking, and defense 4 means he rolls 4 dice when defending. The final piece of information on the card is a little silhouette. This game uses true line of sight, which is always interesting. This silhouette is supposed to make it easy to work out what you can see. The green dot is the target point. This is the bit of your model you draw your line of sight from when making a ranged attack. It's where the model's eyes are. The red area is the hit zone. If you are eyeballing a target and you can see any of the red area of the miniature, then you can shoot at it. For example, even if you could only see Spidey's hand sticking out from behind a wall, you could shoot at him because his hand is red. Compare this to Captain America's card, where his shield actually blocks line of sight to that part of the miniature. Cap clearly needs a bigger shield. Anyway, after deploying your units to the battlefield, you are ready to begin. Or stop for lunch, depending on how long it took. The game itself plays out over a number of rounds, with each round comprising 3 turns for each player. At the start of the round, players take their 4 order markers, 3 of which are marked with a number corresponding to a turn in the round, and 1 of which is a decoy marked with an X. Simultaneously, players position the tokens on their unit cards in such a way their opponents cannot see the number side. They can place the tokens however they wish, and can even place more than 1 on a particular card if they would like that unit to activate more than once. By the time players have finished, they will be able to see which of their opponent's units are going to activate, or may activate as 1 token is a decoy, but they will not know in which order. In this particular example, I'm going to move Spidey on my first and third turns, Cap on my second turn, and I won't be moving Iron Man at all. He's probably just snapped his fingers or something. Meanwhile, from how my opponent has positioned their tokens, it looks like Venom is going to be busy, while Doctor Doom may or may not do something as well, depending on if he has the decoy. Next, there is a dice off for initiative using the d20, and then the players will take it in turns to activate their units in the order determined by how they place their order tokens. Activating a unit involves revealing the order token, moving and attacking. Moving and attacking are optional, but have to be completed in that order, which does feel somewhat restrictive until you get used to it. Lots of characters have special ways to move, like Hulk's super leap and Spidey's web slinging, but a basic move means moving a number of hexes up to your move stat. If you are climbing between levels, each tile that is higher than your current level adds 1 to the movement cost. So moving from here to here would cost 6 movement, 1 point to move to a hex on the same level, 2 points to climb up 1 hex, and then 3 movement to move to a hex 2 hexes higher than that level. Furthermore, a character is never allowed to move up a number of levels equal to or higher than their height value. It's just too high for them to scramble up. As you can see, climbing up can quickly sap your movement, which is why characters with special movement options are quite useful. Fortunately, jumping down off high levels doesn't cost any additional movement, although you have to be careful because unless you have a rule to mitigate it, such as super strength, dropping a distance equal to or greater to a character's height may cause a wound. Falling their height plus 10 tiles has the potential to cause multiple wounds, and falling from their height plus 20 tiles will kill them. I think the only other thing of note regarding movement is the attacks of opportunity a character faces when disengaging, that is, moving away from an opponent they are adjacent to. And special mention again goes to the way tiles are used in the rules here. 2 characters aren't considered adjacent if there is a difference in elevation equal to the lower character's height. So here, Venom can't attack Spidey because Spidey has a height of 5 and is 5 levels lower. To deal with disengagement attacks, the opponent rolls 1 dice for each engaged enemy, and the moving character takes a wound for each skull rolled. The last thing we need to talk about is attacking. Obviously, many characters have special attacks, but for a basic attack, the attacker has to be within range of the target and have line of sight. Many attacks require adjacency, which again has to factor in changes of elevation. Speaking of changes of elevation, all HeroScape characters come from the Obi-Wan School of Martial Arts and gain bonus attack dice for holding the high ground. So if you have a target within range and line of sight, you roll the attack dice listed for your attack. You get 1 extra dice for being at a higher elevation than the target's base, not their actual height, and 2 extra dice if you are 10 or more levels higher than the target's base. And this is where the game goes all Hero Quest on you. For your attack, you tot up the number of skulls rolled. The defender then rolls their defense dice and reduces the number of skulls by the number of shields they roll. Whatever is left gets applied as damage. Once a character takes damage equal to their life stat, they take a dirt nap. And I mean, that's basically it. There are special rules for glyphs, which are usually scenario-specific objects, there are rules for punching a hole through the wall of this ruined building, and there are rules for units that contain more than 1 character and units that aren't unique, although that isn't applicable for this Marvel set. It is, really, one of the most simple skirmish rules I've ever seen, and I really should love it. I have spoken so often about how I love games with streamlined rules. I love it when I can glance over the rules, quickly internalise them, and then start a game. I want to play the game, not the rules, and HeroScape is very easy to learn and teach. Sure, you may forget an elevation bonus every now and again, or miscount the number of movement points you use when climbing up a hill, and obviously special rules or unit cards add a lot of depth, but there's nothing complicated here. And it uses HeroQuest dice for goodness sake. The classic skulls minus shield system is so simple and so instantly understandable, it's great. And I also love how they included narrative scenarios. I've always talked about how much I love scenarios that create stories, so their inclusion here is a fantastic addition. And yet, I don't know why I don't like this game more. I think part of it is the battlefield building element, which I find a bit tiresome, especially when recreating a map from one of the scenarios. That element is going to be a big draw for a lot of people, but for me, I would rather chuck a few hills, woods and buildings on a 6x4 or unfold a board and start chucking dice. I also touched on how the terrain, while being one of the game's strongest features, also creates a built-in limitation on what your battlefield can be. With enough tiles, you can do whatever you want, but you need those tiles. It's quite difficult to proxy in a few hills or rivers from somewhere else. I know that over the years the HeroScaper community has come up with lots of interesting ways to add to their battlefields using all types of other toys, but really, if you want to add more hex-based locations to your battlefield, you need the specific terrain tiles. The original Rise of the Valkyrie starter set had a much greater quantity of tiles, it must be said, but even so, there was always a feeling of needing more to create the fantastic ideas that were floating around in your brain. Years later, Hasbro released Magic the Gathering Arena of the Planeswalkers, which was a Magic-themed iteration of HeroScape with some extra spellcasting rules layered on. That game included only a few plastic tiles and instead had cardboard maps to fight over, making it possible to create a full battlefield with a lot less plastic. I actually think that was probably a better way to go, but for the purists, it was not a great choice. I also wasn't a fan of the order token system. I didn't like that you could stack them all on one unit, so one unit suddenly takes 3 actions in a single turn, while the rest of the army sits around doing absolutely nothing. I also wasn't a fan of being able to see which units your opponent intended to activate. Sure, there's a decoy token for a bit of a fog of war element, but if I can see my opponent is going to activate a specific character, that's going to inform my decisions. After all, if I can kill that character before it activates, then my opponent is going to miss out on a whole turn, maybe multiple turns if that character has several order tokens stacked on it. I just didn't really like that I had that insight into my opponent's strategy. I would much prefer to look at the table and try to figure that stuff out for myself. But as you can see, none of the reasons the game didn't land with me can be considered problems or faults, nothing you would really call bad. The game is very well made, well designed, well thought out, accessible, looks fantastic, and still has enough going on under the hood to give gamers something to really think about as they create their armies and formulate their plans. I just didn't personally find it fun. But I'll tell you something that I do find fun. It's when I see my little boy excitedly playing with this box of Marvel toys while I'm working on my review, creating his own little battlefields on the kitchen table, and then rolling those awesome custom dice as his heroes charge into battle to take down Dr. Doom and his cronies. Maybe, if he'd been around 12 years ago, I would have found HeroScape a lot more enjoyable. But if you think this looks awesome, I have some good and bad news. The bad news is, of course, it is an out of production game. The good news is, some of the old HeroScape stuff is still available on eBay, and in the UK the base sets and more common pieces aren't too expensive because there isn't much demand for them. Yet. So, if you want old stuff, you may be able to track some down. However, if you're looking for something new, Avalon Hill has you covered. As I mentioned at the top of the video, they are currently trying to relaunch HeroScape. They are running a crowdfunding campaign on their HasLab platform. At the time of creating this video, they still have a long way to go to fund, but there's still a long time until the end of the campaign. I am not affiliated with Avalon Hill or Hasbro in any way, but I'll pop the links in the video description below for information purposes, so you can check out the campaign for yourself if you would like to. And let me know in the comments if you might be interested in seeing a little playthrough demo of this game on the channel, because that's it from me for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, please consider pressing the like button. If you've really enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so, and hopefully I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.